sticking to the WikiLeaks portion of the investigation. Remember, that's how the emails got out there. Let's expand our view a little bit to the other players involved. Mueller is also investigating Roger Stone's confidant, Jerome Corsi. Now, Corsi is a far-right conspiracy theorist, considered to be the founder of the so-called birther conspiracy against Barack Obama, the one in which he is said to be not born in America. The special counsel is investigating both Stone and Corsi for what they knew before the release of those hacked Democratic emails during the 2016 elections, most notably those belonging to the chair of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, John Podesta. Now, just hours ago, NBC News senior investigations producer Anna Schechter finally sat down with Jerome Corsi. This was an interview a long time in the making. He told her that he figured out that Podesta's emails were coming out, maintaining that he never met with Assange. Joining me now, Anna Schechter, also with us, NBC News investigations reporter Tom Winter. When these two are here on set, you know something's up. Anna, you were sitting with me a week ago, 10 days ago or something. You were supposed to be talking to Jerome Corsi. He had arrived. He was downstairs. He was in his car, and he said, nope, we're not talking. His lawyer shut it down. Aaron Zelinsky, the prosecutor, had called his lawyer and said, do not do anything. They were in the midst of negotiations over a plea. He was offered a plea and he has rejected it. So this is actually going to make his life a lot more complicated. He's in hot water. But big picture, we actually got all the court documents, everything that the government gave to his lawyers, and it shows that there were emails between him and Stone leading up to the John Podesta email dump, and they couldn't wait to find out what was happening. Stone suggests he actually goes to see Assange, or that their friend in London, another far-right writer, go to see him. And Corsi actually passed on that email to that London writer. We don't know if he actually went or not. All right. Have you got some of that interview we can listen to? Absolutely. We've got a clip right now. Okay, let's listen to it. When he said, time to let more than Podesta be exposed in bed with enemy if they're not ready to drop HRC. What does that mean? Well, I was saying to Stone that I thought these were going to be so damaging to Hillary, as they had been to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, that the Democrats might want to say that Hillary's sick and old and get rid of her, because I believe these Podesta emails would destroy Hillary. Now, why did I think they were coming out in October? Because I said to myself, if I had these emails, I'd use them as the October surprise. And why did I think they were going to come out serially, drip by drip? Because Assange is very strategic. He understands the news cycle. But you didn't know that at the time, did you? This is speculation. Well, you didn't exactly write to him that it would be drip by drip. Yes. No, I did, though, explain that to him. There were some phone conversations I had with him in which I made... So you essentially told Stone exactly what was going to happen? Yes. Wow, that's an interesting defense. I got it all right because I guessed really well. That's exactly right. And then he explains being in the room with these prosecutors and how they're just completely incredulous. They don't believe him. I mean, it's an incredible story that he just figured it out. And he's been telling me this all along. But now we actually have the court documents. We know that he has been given this plea negotiation. They want him to plead guilty to one count of misstatements, that he lied to investigators about communications with people close to Assange or people trying to get information with Assange. The big picture here is that you had this core group of people who were desperate to find out what Assange had, and they were willing to go to great lengths. In fact, Corsi even told me in that interview that he would have loved to go and fly over to London and meet with Assange. He just didn't think that he was likely to get in, so he didn't want to get on the plane. I always wonder, Tom Winter, if Anna's going to get Stockholm Syndrome hanging around these conspiracy theorists. But take this out now. If anybody can be impervious to it, it's Anna. Right, I would agree. Let's take this out to the bigger picture now. Robert Mueller, who's interested in what Donald Trump knew and to what degree there was any coordination with efforts to discredit Hillary Clinton, whether or not there were Russians involved. Where does this piece that Anna has fit into this?
Well, I think first off, the thing that's really interesting here is, first off, these are public statements. So anything that Corsi has said today that we've published that's aired that from Anna's interview is something that, is a statement that can eventually be referred to in some sort of a document. Two, I think it's very interesting, according to the court documents that Anna was able to obtain, that in the plea agreement, there's no offer, there's no cooperation agreement that's a part of this, which I think is telling. It means that either they don't need Jerome Corsi's cooperation and continuation of this investigation, or maybe they don't trust what Mr. Corsi is going to say. We don't know that yet from prosecutors. I think the WikiLeaks question is a big question because of these tweets, because of these text messages and these emails and documents and things that Anna's been sharing with us now for the past several weeks, because you want to know, if you're a prosecutor, you want to know, first off, who is behind all the troll accounts, all the social media stuff. Well, we've kind of answered that. According to their indictment, that's what they say happened. That indictment we got back in February. This summer, we get a little bit more clarity as far as how this hacking occurred. Who were the people behind it? What was a little bit of WikiLeaks' response dating back to July? So Mueller has kind of gone around and said, okay, we got to answer this question that happened.
Right.
We've got to answer the next question that happened. The one that's still outstanding is the Podesta emails, because we don't have a lot of clarity from any of the indictments that we've seen so far and any of the reports as to who was behind this.
Right.
So I think that's the next question that needs to be answered. I think the legal activity and the discussions that have been taking place and been documented by Anna and others that we've seen over the last several weeks, I think is moving towards that for Mueller. And I think it's an important question that he needs to answer. Did anybody on the Trump team have any knowledge of the John Podesta emails in advance of them being published by WikiLeaks? And then, of course, the ultimate question, which is, did anybody in the Trump campaign direct or were involved with the release of those emails, which came out just about a half hour or so after the Access Hollywood tape?
That's remarkable. All right. Thanks for both of your great reporting on this, Anna Schechter and Tom Winter. Where can we see the rest of that interview? Is it posted?
You can find it online. We're going to post it online. And then we've got a full story that goes through all of the revelations in the court documents.
Definitely worth getting your head around this. I mean, I know everybody's sort of brain is full with this stuff, but this Jerome Corsi is quite a character.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.